Welcome to the People Performance Podcast with me, Tracy Roberts.
And me, Lydia English.
I'm still getting used to saying that. It sounds so much better, but I think I'm just stuck in a loop. So I just need to get that off my chest, I think. Feel much better for that.
What a relief.
I'm excited to be podcasting with you today, Lids.
Yeah.
We don't get to do it very often, do we?
No, I don't volunteer very often.
No, but we also know you add loads of value to a podcast. So hopefully our listeners will get to hear and see you more and more. And I'm sure you're really excited about that.
Very excited.
Well, today, the reason that you're mainly in to have this conversation with me is because we're looking at something that you, I would say, are a bit of an expert in, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it helps the conversation to have someone with your knowledge, kind of not just look at things from a organisational or a T2 perspective, kind of sat in the middle. And I guess as we go through the subject, we'll kind of explain how that works. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a rethink around recruitment. Ooh, sounds exciting, doesn't it? And I guess for us, it's a conversation that comes up a lot.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people we work with are looking at recruitment in different areas, aren't they? And sometimes it's the talent struggle.
Yeah.
So the recruitment conversation they're having there is around getting the right people in and in the first place. There were other people who are looking at it from a perspective of leadership development, maybe, that sort of thing. And I guess what we'll look at there is succession planning, maybe.
Yeah.
And then we've got other people that we work with that kind of are moving people internally within different types of roles. So that can either be promotion process, or it can even be, in some cases, people taking on, like buying into the business. So almost like franchising and kind of partnerships. And I guess a lot of the questions we get asked is around how to do this the right way and how we can, get the best of the talent and make the best of the talent. And I guess as part of the consulting process, some of the questions that get thrown up to us, we kind of feel like if we've been able to go in a little bit earlier as an organisation, i.e. the one we're working with, we might not have encountered some of those issues that we're kind of dealing with. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation because for the last 18 months or so, I think, we've been doing much more support around recruitment.
Yeah, definitely.
In our assessment centre kind of offering. But it's also allowed us a lot more conversations with our partners around the way they do things and how they can get better outcomes, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
So I thought what we could talk about today is recruitment and I guess how it's traditionally been done.
Yeah.
And maybe, some of the assumptions we make, some of the mistakes we make with that, and also how recruitment, if it's done right, it's the experience of the candidate, whether they're an internal candidate, external candidate, someone new to the organisation completely. We want to make sure that when we're doing these things, we're leaving the right legacy. And what I mean by that is if I have ever gone for a role and I have left the experience positive, despite not getting said job or, not being offered a position at that time. And quite often it's a not now. Yeah. It's not a no, if that makes sense. I do leave thinking, you know what, that still had a good experience. I learned a lot about the organisation. I'm deeply connected to it. They gave me some really good tangible feedback and I would definitely still apply for a job or want to work there. In fact, there was one company that I went to apply for. And actually the feedback was I was actually overqualified, which is always a really bad bit of feedback, isn't it? Because you're like, well, thank you, but I actually really wanted that job. But the nice feedback that I would give that organisation was the recruitment process was actually fun. Yeah. Which is a weird thing to say. They surprised me at every single opportunity. So I kind of got into situations I didn't expect to be in, but I kind of embraced them. Yeah. And then when I got through the other side and I saw how good the other candidates were, I kind of felt like we were all in it together. And then when I didn't get the job, yes, I was upset, but I got really great feedback. And actually I was pleased for the other people as well because we kind of got to know each other through the process. And I still pursued a role with that company for several years. And in fact, I'm still in contact with them. Not that I would take the job, but I just got such a good experience. And I actually
make all the difference, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. And I think one of the things that I'm going to shout out one of our partners now, Specsavers, because we do a load of work with those guys. They're all so passionate about getting the right people, doing the right thing by people. One of the things they get absolutely right is We want the experience to be enjoyable,
Yes.
and we want them to take something away. And I genuinely don't think, if I look back to my early leadership experiences, that was ever something in the equation.
No.
Can you think of an occasion where you've gone for a job and it's been fun?
No, not at all. I think people see recruitment and your traditional interviewing as scary. You sat in front of a panel, and that's what people still expect today. When you're going for an interview, you think, right, I'm going to be sat in front of a panel of 4 people who are judging me. And it's just a nerve-wracking experience.
I think that's a really good way to look at it, as in judging, because we all judge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess if we think about, we're going to get into this conversation about reducing our bias, because obviously that's a key reason for rethinking your recruitment. But I do think that's a really important thing to land on, isn't it? Because we don't ever prep ourselves, or many of us don't prep ourselves and think, I'm buzzing to go and meet these people.
No.
We're thinking about all those traditional experiences we've had where we've gone in and potentially, you know, the minute you walk in, you feel that person on the left-hand side not really connecting with you and not making eye contact, someone rolling their eyes at an answer, you know, and you're getting these kind of like physical cues from people. And sometimes you're imagining it a little bit as well, obviously. And you think of an interview of them asking you difficult questions to catch you out. And actually, I don't think that's really the way that, you know, people who are thinking about it in a clever way are doing it. They're positioning it so that actually you're allowing this person to show up in their best self.
Exactly, yeah.
Not in a false way, but in a realistic way. And I think there's got to be a little bit of nervous anxiety around, because if you're not a little bit anxious, you don't care enough, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But we want to put people into a state where when they come in, they sort of want to enjoy a conversation with you. And I'm not just saying this either because I work here. I feel like I got that experience when I joined T2. It was the first time, you know, out of a big organization. Yeah. I walked out of like where, you know, 20, 30 people would be going for specific jobs on a specific day. And it was a little bit like a revolving door. But when I walked in here, it took me a couple of minutes to realize that the whole of the team were in my interview.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, like these people are just all staring at me. But everybody wanted me to do well. You could tell. They kind of go, we want a new person for the team. We hope this is the person.
Yes.
And then even the CEO comes in and Martin comes, strong handshake, cracks a joke. And I think, yeah, you know, and the way that interview ran for me was allowing me to be best self.
Yeah.
And I still remember Martin saying 10 minutes in, I wrote on a piece of paper to Claire, I really like this person, you know, and he said, it's because you just seem to relax. And when I asked you at the end, were you nervous? You said, not really. And I said to him, in some situations, if I'd have said not really, I'd have looked cocky. But it wasn't about me being cocky. It was about you made me feel comfortable. So I felt like I could just be myself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I think the conversations that we have around any of those kind of areas around, you know, if we're going to promote people, if we're going to bring new people in, and if we're going to think about, you know, stakeholders that we might put into different roles, the outcomes and the way we do things have got to be the same, haven't they? It's got to be, we've got to create a good experience. We've got to set some expectations, 100% of what we expect to see and what we'd like to see. But ultimately, there's got to be a follow-up from it as well.
Yeah.
And I think with some of the organisations we've worked with, that's maybe the part they've been lacking. They've maybe gone through the process with people, and then some of the feedback that they've had around not getting selected for a job, or you know, potentially being told not now, which is another kind of way of looking at it. They kind of have been left confused and with a bitter taste in their mouth because they don't really have it explained to them why they're not ready yet.
And it is so important. Obviously, it's so nice giving somebody good news that, yes, you've been successful, but it's never pleasant giving somebody, sorry, but you've been unsuccessful on this occasion. But it's so important because, like, going back to what you said at the beginning, it's giving that person a good experience of you and your organisation and your brand.
Yeah, and you've got to think of it as like, I mean, we always talk about Glassdoor reviews and things like that, but what people actually think about working somewhere, because it can be smoke and mirrors sometimes. And I guess from our perspective, a lot of the stuff that we see around people being promoted, as an example, there'll be a level of expectations of the skills required to do that next job. But quite often they've not necessarily been put in a great position previous to be ready for that role.
Yeah.
So then they jump into the interview process and they kind of don't know the expectations sometimes, or they could have been working on those expectations for 6 months, but have had no idea until this point what was expected.
Yes.
So that's hard. The other side of the coin is we've got 3 things that we look at. Well, 4 things really: skills,
Yep.
attributes, which is another conversation,
Yep.
behaviors, massive thing, and values. Like, so the people that we work with that get this right, they link everything back to their values.
Yes.
So when they're interviewing, they're trying to strip some of the opportunity for bias out of the equation. So many are starting with a blind sift. So they'll get, application letters and CVs, and they'll take names and bits and bobs off, so that actually they just look at in their raw form, what this person's got going for them. And are they essentially qualified to apply for the job? Because we do know some jobs, if you don't have, I'm not ever going to be someone who can do coding, for instance. I can't just walk in and wing that. I can wing a lot of things, but not that. So there's got to be a base level, right?
Yeah.
But after that, it's all got to be down to a mix of those other things.
Yes.
And I think traditionally interviewing in the way we have kind of takes that away, because if you think of going through a set of CVs now, you know nothing about the person, you know nothing about their latent potential. Sometimes we make some assumptions based on, I don't know, someone who's jumped around a lot.
Yes.
That could be a big thing, can't it? Even just down to the fact that, you can see on their CV, they've got great skills, in inverted commas, and they've maybe been at a company a long period of time. Some people might then say, well, they've been in that job for a long time, so how are they going to change to do this job, as an example? Yeah. But that comes down less to skills and more to attributes.
Yes.
They might have skills that they've learned, but attributes in their system that have been dormant for a long time. Yeah. So I guess it's down to that process to kind of draw some of that out.
Yeah.
Even if it's not the finished product, it's okay, well, I know I'd have to do this.
Yeah.
So what I've been thinking about in terms of my development is this. And I don't think we always take that approach.
No, I think sometimes, particularly traditional methods, it's very much focused on the skills. And even when you get the person in for the interview, the questions asked are around strengths and weaknesses and
I hate that wording.
experience.
I hate that wording. What's your strengths? What's your weaknesses?
Yeah.
Because, even just saying it sounds wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because the minute you say, what's your strengths, people panic and go, right, I want to sound confident, but not big-headed. And I want to be humble, but I also want to push myself.
Yeah.
And then traditionally there's the same answers to loads of the things. But I'm really perfectionistic. Yeah. That's my downfall. I'm so perfectionistic. And I would say my strengths are I'm honest, and you think, they're key things that people ideally would like to hear.
Yeah.
But are they really how you want to depict yourself? Probably not. You're saying what you think they want you to say.
Yeah. Another classic one is I work really well on my own, but also really well as part of a team.
Yeah. But we all know that's not true. We know that you're generally one way or the other, or you've got tolerance levels that are different in different situations. So actually they're really good examples of, like, if you type into Google now how to answer interview questions, you'll get a whole heap of those things coming off, won't you? But I even think those things over the years have changed. If I think back to when I was leaving the forces and I went through a big day workshop on how to project yourself in an interview, I cringe now when I think about what they told me to say and how to respond and tell me about my body language and all those things. And I guess as generational shifts have started to occur, even just the way we see the world, of course we're going to answer things slightly differently. So we have to take into consideration as recruiters or people looking to promote people that we have to move as well. Yeah. And we have to think about the differences that we've got to take into consideration, different working conditions now, different expectations. And I think part of the problem is that we're not always exactly sure what we want when we're recruiting.
No.
Because sometimes and actually it can go both ways if you think about it. You can go, we're just going to look for a unicorn. We've been there. We've definitely been there. But then we go, no, we only want this, we want 5 years experience. And I think leaving the process open in some shape or form can be the healthiest way to look at it from a diversity perspective, because then we're going to look at all situations and take everything into consideration. I also think that some people find some parts of the recruitment process harder than others.
Oh, yeah.
So some people are really good at the perfect letter, are happy with a CV. You ask them to submit a video.
Yes.
And I'm talking from personal experience here at T2. We expect anyone who applies for a job here to supply video. I want to say only 10% of people follow through with a video.
They do. It puts a lot of people off.
Yeah. And to us, obviously, it's different because we're looking for someone who doesn't hesitate in sending a video. But in an average kind of environment, for some people, that's quite an exposing thing, right? Other people love that.
Oh,
They'd rather do that than send the letter, you know. So I guess it's about, for you guys listening now, just starting to think about some of these processes. Have you still got some processes in place that are maybe, I don't know, you're holding back some opportunity in what you might see because you've kind of got more of a rigid process, or maybe even a bit of a dated process, you know, and even the levels, the steps to get a job. I was reading a Harvard Business Review article the other day about one company having 7 steps to get any role in that company.
Wow.
And how it would take people 9 months sometimes to get a job. And it wasn't because it was like security clearance or, you know, it was just one of those things where they bounce between different members of the senior team to get their opinion.
Yeah.
And they saw that as, okay, well, at least we'll take everyone into consideration and we won't miss anything.
Yeah.
What they didn't think about was the pressure at the other end for that person.
Yeah, the candidate's experience.
Yeah. By the time they got to 9 months, I don't think they'd probably want to work there anyway.
Well, no, you'd be exhausted, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and you've met everyone and decided who you like and you don't like as well. And then the other side of that is the time and money. So think about, so even if you take into consideration 9 touch points and 9 sets of paperwork, whatever that is, that's hours and hours of manpower to say to that person at the end, no, sorry.
Yeah. And then from the candidate's perspective, if they're already employed, that's 7 days booked off work.
Yeah. And on tender hooks.
Yeah.
Probably not in your best self, really, if you think about it, because you wouldn't be. And, you know, people leave jobs for different reasons. We can't assume that everyone's leaving because they're unhappy. Some people just outgrown their role as well, haven't they? And I guess that's talking about your traditional recruitment. But when you're talking about internal processes like recruitment to new roles, so promotion boards, things like that.
Yeah.
We've been doing a lot of work with fire services, police services, and other kind of private sector companies. We've been having big discussions about this. And I guess from our perspective, even that has been a useful learning experience for us around how sometimes having quite a rigid process in some ways, as long as it's managed correctly, to a certain point, we're still going to sift fairly, and then we're going to give everyone a chance when they actually get to sit in front of people and put them in the right place. So I guess what I've taken from that is that there's been more choice for people, as in when they're applying for certain roles, because they know that there's certain things that, you know, you might have to have this, but to go through the process, you know, it's the same for everybody. But other people have been able to show up and show themselves in a different light that they wouldn't have expected otherwise, because they've been put into a comfortable environment. So we should probably talk a little bit more about what they look like in a little while. But for the people listening in, I think it's more around reconsidering how you approach this. And is there a little bit of space for a bit of a project on how you recruit right now? And also taking into consideration the moving world. You know, I guess some of the things that we spoke about was reducing our bias in many different forms. So, you know, standardized scoring, making sure everyone's going through the same process. And one of the big things I wrote down here, and we'll probably cover this in more detail, was thinking about how you're measuring people.
Yeah.
Because that was always a little bit of a gap for us, wasn't it? When we were talking to clients, it's like, okay, so you want this person to do this job, but in what way?
Yeah.
Because behaviors can make or break a role, right?
Yeah.
It's not about I can do this job. It's about the influence I have on other people. Do I agree with the company's values? Do I live into them? And one of the biggest things I think we encounter, particularly when we're talking about conflict resolution or an underperforming team, is the behaviours.
Oh yeah,
It's very rarely the skills, right?
No.
So that's one part of the equation. Obviously, enhancing the candidate experience is another one, and then improved employer branding, which is what we were saying.
Yeah.
People will leave that experience and go, I would definitely recommend you going through that company or meeting those people. And I'm probably more likely to reapply if you said I could. Because that's the other thing. If someone comes through and they're just blatantly wrong for a role, the bulk standard, no reply or no thanks, doesn't really help.
No.
because I don't think some people realise they're a bad fit sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think the tangible feedback part's probably the next thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how many jobs. I mean, there's not many jobs. It sounds really bad when I say this, but I don't think I've gone through many jobs and not got them because I've been in long-term employment like for most of my life.
Same really, yeah.
But during COVID, when I was reconsidering my options, it's just even not getting a response to things sometimes.
Yeah.
Or even internally, I can remember a couple of roles I've gone for internally in different companies, and how, because you're internal, they kind of don't give you the same quality of care. Does that make sense? Like they don't guide you through the process. They go, right, you're doing the same as what an external candidate does. You figure it out. And you're like, well, hang on a minute. I've been working here a long period of time, and it's not I want you to give me the answers. I just want you to show me what's the right route to take when I'm coming through this process. So I think those are important things to think about. And I think we're getting people that are coming to us and saying, look, we want to do leadership development. And we're saying, okay, what kind of bucket are these people in? And they're like, what do you mean? And we're like, well, are they emergers? Are they people who are coming through your business at the minute that you go, they're a future leader, got very little skills, but they need to go through some of this training and embed it and, take things into the real world? Are they succession planning people? So they're, if their boss dropped down tomorrow, they might be at 50, 60%, maybe even above that. They're probably going to step into those shoes at some point, and if a recruitment process came up, they'd probably be in the running. Or are you talking about people who are ready to step into really senior roles, or potentially in some cases become a stakeholder in the business? And of course we deal with all three groups of those, but I think quite often when it comes to leadership development, we've got all those buckets are muddled up sometimes, and we're not quite sure. And I can think of some companies we've worked with that have gone through what's classed as a leadership development program. They're thinking at the end there's going to be some form of recruitment process for them to be promoted or be considered as for another role. And actually what happens is about 80% of the way through that people say, well, the reality is, unless your boss goes tomorrow,
nothing's going to happen.
Nothing's happening. So then it fizzles, and that's where those people kind of feel like they've been led towards a recruitment area, and actually it's non-existent. And I guess that's where we lose people in an organization, isn't it? And I guess the other side of it is people who are going through a natural progression. So a great example would be a fire service or a police service, where people know what the next rung looks like to them, get a window of opportunity, and sometimes jump straight in there. And for them, the consistency there is that everyone's treated the same, and that they get an opportunity to answer the questions just like anyone else and go through the same process. So it's been quite an interesting thing to observe over the last 18 months, the different approaches that people take. I guess the next sort of thing that I'm interested to see is, I know we've got some clients that want to work with us on bringing brand new blood into the business in a slightly different way. Rather than your traditional send a CV, will get you in for an interview. They're going to attempt to do a form of assessment centre after having some consulting with us. And I'm really interested to see how that works for certain organisations. So people coming in and having a great experience. And it is a little bit like that company that I said that I will still remember the recruitment process fondly. The reason I enjoyed it was I was made to feel welcome straight away. I was told how I could succeed. So I know it sounds stupid. Here's our values. This is what we're looking for. And if you yourself and you align with these, then hey, listen, we're totally up for having you working here. I think the other thing was, as I said, the word fun is a bit of a weird word to use, but in that case it was fun. But I also learned something about myself. So during the process, although some crazy things happened, in fact I can share one of them. So I went online and it was a quiz.
Right.
So I was obviously online, two people at the other end, and they were like, they did like a brand quiz with me around, and then they kind of questioned me around what my brand was. And there was like almost like game show music going on, and it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. And because immediately I was like, what on earth is going on? And then I thought, they've got humor in this. I like this, So I became myself. Then the second that I sort of got through that period, they went, right, when you're on your next session, when you log in, there's going to be someone at the end that you don't know. And we're going to put you into a scenario and we're going to see how you deal with it. And I was like, oh my goodness, And I went online, and essentially it was someone, a disgruntled stakeholder,
Oh, okay.
in an organization, and I was kind of the supplier, if you like, and I had to deal with this situation. And it was a little bit a bit scary to start with.
I'd be a bit scared.
But then I thought, they're not setting me up for failure here. There was no like, harshness about it. It was just the reality of the job. And actually, I came off that session and thought, for that particular role, that wouldn't have suited me.
No.
Because that was reality.
Yeah.
Was somebody at the end, and I'm sat there going, I have limited control over this. And
Yeah.
for someone like me, as you know, I like to have full control over things. So it made me really rethink about it. And they said that was a job I didn't get, I was overqualified. But it also made me think at the time, that job in that organisation isn't for me.
Mm-hmm.
I want that one. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for me, I did come off it and thinking, yeah, I mean, I'm looking at all options at the minute because, the world is my oyster, but it actually helped me siphon down.
Yeah.
The company was right, the role wasn't.
Yeah.
Whereas I might have just, in another place, just taken that job and thought, I'll figure it out as I go, and been bloody miserable.
Yeah.
And I bet there's so many people do that, don't they?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So can you think of a good recruitment example or a bad one, or have yours kind of been pretty straightforward? Sit down, answer some questions. And
so I think, like I said, I've not really had that many recruitment experiences. There was one though that I went to, which was an assessment style scenario. So we went through a number of activities and we were being observed, and it was all going okay. And then it got to the interview and they were asking quite personal questions.
Oh, really?
And some questions were quite difficult. And when I would answer them, I felt like I was being judged, basically.
Oh, yeah.
And I got home and I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. And after a couple of days and I'd reflected on it, I was like, you know what? No.
Yeah.
And the company called me to give me some feedback. And what I've always remembered about this phone call, I was on the phone for about 20 minutes with this lady, and she gave me this feedback, and she seemed to focus on all the stuff that they didn't like. And I was thinking, oh, okay, so I've not got this then. And then she finished giving me this feedback. She's like, yeah, but I thought you did really well, so we'd like to invite you back. And I got off the phone and I was so confused. I was like, what's going on? So I thought about it, and then I was like, you know what? No, this isn't a place I want to work.
Oh, that's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a valid point as well around feedback, because people, the natural assumption with the word feedback is, deliver all the hard stuff and tell them the truth. And the reality is, I guess, to get recruitment right, the questions have to be right in the first place, which is something we'll talk about. But the other side of it is that feedback isn't, let's show you all the stuff you're not good at and what you need to work on to be good at it.
Yeah.
Yes, there's an element of, okay, well, maybe didn't see as much of this, so you maybe have to be conscious of this.
Yeah.
But the stuff we love was this, and this is really what ticked it for us, and I think I can definitely kind of think of situations like that where I've had to be really conscious, even when I've been ringing someone as someone who's recruiting, and the interview was really bad. I've still had to try and think, right, I'm not going to deliver the sandwich because that's just not going to work.
No.
But I need to give a level of honesty because I don't want to be harsh.
No.
But if so many things were wrong in that interview, you kind of need to understand how that might affect you if you go for something else.
Yeah.
So I've always felt of it like a bit of a duty of care to say, things to consider maybe X, Y, Z,
forward,
but there's probably something in there that you can still think, it's not the sandwich, it's just being honest, you know. But it is harder when someone is just against everything. I think the hardest bit is the behavioural stuff, isn't it?
Yes.
Because skills, you can pass that. You can go, yes, in or out. Attributes to a degree, if you've got experience in a certain area, you can make assumptions that certain attributes are present, but you're not going to be sure about the stuff they haven't tapped into yet. Like I always use that expression of like, if Kevin in accounts has worked in accounts for 20 years, how do you know he's not a brilliant project manager or
a marketeer?
Marketeer, yeah, he might be like one of those ninjas that just comes up with great ideas, but you just don't ask him the questions. So it is hard, but I still think there's a way to get the experience right. And I think in the work that we're doing with the organisations we're kind of focusing on at the moment, I think a lot of it has been around from them. The key things that they say to us is we want to make it fair.
Yeah.
We want to make it fun. We want to take bias into the equation because we know it exists.
Yes.
What other things have we been hearing from, or what other things do you think we need to consider with stuff like that? Because it can be tricky to get it right, can't it?
Yeah.
I think it is really aligning with like the company values too.
That's it, yeah. And I think values are so important. If a person doesn't align with your company's values, it's not going to work. I'm reading this book at the moment. It's just called Teamwork, by a chap called Michael West, and he's done a load of research. He works a lot in the NHS and public services, and he's found that teams which have values that don't align with the organisational values just aren't successful. They just don't get the job done.
It makes sense, doesn't it? And I think whatever your organisation stands for, you need to stamp that very clearly from the beginning, don't you? So if it's someone new coming in, because I guess we've looked at this different ways in the past few months. If someone new's coming in, it's like, these are the non-negotiables.
Yeah.
You know, so that if you're going to come in here, just know that from the minute you set foot in this organisation, you're measured against this. And I think the other side of that is, do you follow through on your promise there? Because in that first 90 days, are you checking in regularly to make sure those people are living into those values? Because otherwise, in 6 months' time, you're going to be going, do we keep them on or not?
Yeah.
And then you can't really hold them accountable because you haven't for that 6 months.
Yeah.
So you've got to think about that. And then when it comes to promotion, they should already be exhibiting those behaviours.
Yes.
But some people go through the process or not. We know that. So it needs to be reaffirmed, but also we need to add into the equation what's required of them at leadership level sometimes.
Yeah.
So it might be, here are our values, but when it comes to how that aligns with leadership, that's a step up again, isn't it?
Yeah, it's completely different ballgame.
But I think you're right. You can definitely kind of make connections between what the company wants to achieve and what they expect, and obviously what your expectations of life are as well. I guess the other thing that I was thinking about was, obviously the experience is really, really important, but a lot of studies show that there's like a little bit more predictive validity in doing a system of like assessment rather than an interview than your traditional interview. People are more likely to see the latent potential in people rather than just focus on, you know, the here and now. I mean, if I have to think about people that I've worked with over the years, if I'd have just gone on the interview, that a few of them might not have got it because I didn't see enough, but that's because they weren't comfortable. Does that make sense? Whereas if you're going through an assessment centre or something similar, you're giving people opportunities at several touch points to shine.
And to show how they perform in stuff that they'll be doing actually in the job as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing when we're talking about some of these kind of bits and bobs that we're working on with organisations around how they personalise it. So we can come in and go, okay, we're going to add the like sort of non-biased approach, and we're going to add the understanding of what's required in terms of what we see in front of us. You've got to put your stamp on your measurement. Does that make sense? So I guess a lot of that's values, a lot of it's behaviours. And there's a bit of a mix, isn't there, of what we're measuring across a period of time. The other thing that we threw into the equation with some people that we work with is that ability to do a little bit of pre-work. So with some that we're working with, they use tools, don't they? So they'll use a form of psychometric tool as an example, or a values tool, you know, for questions around how would you live into this value, or because I guess the traditional way of doing that would be, what do you know about the company? And you'd be surprised, actually, how many people don't do their homework. I wouldn't dare do that.
First thing I'd do.
I'm like, well, I saw it at page 22 of your website.
Maybe not
quote unquote.
Detail.
But no, but it is, I guess it is a better way of doing that, isn't it? It's like, so for us, we use a couple of different tools: social styles, attributes, print profiling. For years and years, I think some of that was a little bit misunderstood. People would think, I mean, traditionally people go into an interview would think, oh, if you're doing a test on me, you're trying to figure out if I'm out or in. No, that's not how they're there to be used. They're there to actually make it fair. Because you're not, as an example, if they're using a tool, a psychometric tool, you're actually looking at questions based on, say, their motivations. So it's nothing to do with the job per se. It's more to do with how they're wired and how they see the world.
And how they would deal with certain situations.
Because of that. Yeah, definitely. So you're not going to go, because I did have someone ask me this question last week. They said, well, they do a lot of work with us and they use our print profiling tool. Obviously, there are other tools available, I have to say that. But they were saying that an old person that they work with in a HR environment had said to them not to use it because they felt like people might use it as a weapon and go, right, well, we've got too many of those people in here and we don't want that. And I said, well, there's a little bit of a truth in that, in the sense if you're not careful, it could be used in that light.
Yeah.
But the way that we use it is actually just a little bit of pre-learning for us to think about what motivates this person, how they might communicate, where they might find it easy or hard in certain situations.
Yeah.
And certainly in the assessment centre processes that we've been running recently, it's more around self-development for them, right?
Yeah.
Because that's another thing they take away with them. They come in and I guess one way to look at it is they come in, they get a couple £100 worth of investment in them just by turning up.
Yeah.
And if they get the job at the end, they get a job also. But if they don't get a job, they get an action plan at the end saying, this is what we saw.
Yeah.
Here's your profiling tool that can really help you in the future, whether you reapply or not.
Yeah.
And we hope that you got something from it, you know. And I think the idea behind using that is that then we can do things like make some expectations about the questions we can ask that person.
Yeah.
To allow them to be in best self. And although we do look at questions that might discuss the reality, if that makes sense, we definitely wouldn't do it to such a degree where we would go, right, let's make this person squirm. That's not what it's there for.
No.
But there is a little bit of an element of confidence in the fact that if someone is taking this on board, and even if they're not fully connected with it straight away, they're going, hey, listen, this does sound like me. And actually in some situations that does sound a bit like what I do, and that explains why I do that. If somebody can process that quickly and get on board with it and see how that needs to align with the way the company does things, then you're asking questions based on their truth and it is authentic. And quite often, a lot of the time, we will get people who come in and be quite closed off to those sorts of models and ways of looking at things. But just by helping them understand why it's important to connect with who you are as an individual, allows them to know that we actually want them to be authentic. So rather than that, oh yes, I absolutely love working overtime, and no, I never avoid conflict. We'll say, you know, how much did you connect with that? And they'll go, hey, really does sound like me. It makes perfect sense. And okay, so how did you get there? What's your story? Even that's interesting, isn't it? And then it's like, okay, so if that's you, then it sounds like conflict isn't natural to you. So what have you put in place for that over the years? And
how can you deal with it?
How can you deal with it better? And I think I would much rather someone was honest in that situation and not lie. And I think you can pick up on that, can't you, when you're assessing? And then I guess the other elements of the assessments that are depending on who we're working with is some team-based work. So that really shows up, you know, how they perform within a group environment. Do they step in?
How they work with others? Do they help others?
And I think even just their behaviours during that, you know, so do they use the fact that they know they're an able communicator too much and push people out of the way? Or are they conscious of that and encourage people into the conversation? If they're more introverted, do they realise that and step and ask a question from time to time? Or, you know, if there's one person that looks a little bit left out, does someone lean in and go, hey?
Invites them into the discussion.
And I think that's, for me, that's one of the nicest parts of watching Assessment Centre. And then we usually do some form of group exercise where they've got to work together. And then we kind of talk about different things in relation to their brand. So with some companies, we'll do almost like problem-solving activities or commercial exercises, won't we, where they've got to work together. And then all of those things kind of lead into some form of, we'll call it an interview. But there's a different approach to it, right? So different people in the conversation. Quite often one of us is in that conversation as the external person as well. That really helps. Because there's loads of benefits to having us as an external person on that board, isn't there? I mean, we're seeing different things, aren't we?
But particularly in promotional processes as well, where the majority of the candidates are internal, it's great to just have that external view on things. So, you know, going back to bias, we don't have that as much bias there because we don't know the individuals, whereas other people do. And we can just step in and go, you know, why do you think that? And just take a step back. If you didn't know them, would you have the same opinion?
That's a really good way to look at it, actually, because I like the fact that we don't know much when we go in there. I really enjoy that part of it. And as you said, part of our job is to challenge, but it's also to use what we know.
Yeah.
So we know a lot about, you know, people's behavior, their psychometrics, all those things. And our job is to go, how do we get them in best self? You know, as much as we want to ask them some, you know, tricky questions to see how they answer it, but how do we put them in a good place?
Yeah.
And I think traditionally over the year, I've been with people who've been doing a recruitment board before, and they're there to scare the hell out of people.
Yeah, which is just not productive, is it? Because you're not getting the best version of that person.
No. And then I guess with some of the organisations we work with, the other element we bring in is role play, which everyone cringes at, don't they? Oh my God, role play. And for those of us who've worked in like customer service and sales over the years, it's the worst thing ever. But again, when it's done well, and I mean really well, and we've been working with a fire service recently who uses actual actors, and it's been brilliant.
Amazing,
really good. I like being in that process where we've given them a brief, they do certain things, they respond, we're all given our indicators as to what we saw in that situation. And it's not just an internal conversation then. It's not just that, well, they didn't act the way we'd like them to act. It's more around, well, actually, this is what we saw from the outside. Because unfortunately, you know, when we're in an organisation with someone for a long period of time, we have the stories. You know, there might have been a mistake at some point. There might have been a cross wire or you know, miscommunication. And we're still going to look through those lenses sometimes, aren't we? And it's something we can't do much about. Is how we're built, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone has bias.
And I think the funny thing about bias is if you think you've got no bias, you've got bias. So, and I do think also from the perspective of what they get from that scenario, I think the last bit on that particular type of assessment centre is there's a rounded experience, a little bit of them, a little bit of team, a little bit of stakeholder communication, a little bit of, you know, one-on-one time. And then even if they're unsuccessful, the message that we always ask employers to say where possible is not now. So,
it's not a no, it's a not now.
Yeah, particularly with recruitment processes. But the not now bit is caveated slightly because it's not now, but maybe in 12 months, or not now, but you're 4 years away. And there's a big difference. And I do think some people have been frustrated in their careers because they've gone for promotion boards and they get a no and a no and a no and a no and a no, and they're not getting tangible feedback. Or some people will go through and be that much tiny little bit off that person in front of them and not realise how close they were. And the feedback's not been good enough for them to understand that and go, I'm going to go straight back in and try again next time. And they've been so bewildered by the whole experience that actually it makes them think, do they actually want that job in the first place? So we always say, if you're going to, there's going to be categorically people who, if their behaviours don't fit what you want, you're going to have to say no. But in most cases, I would argue that if people really want a job, what they want you to hear is, or what they want to hear is how they can improve. And then if they walk away and go, right, I felt supported, I felt like I kind of enjoyed the process as much as it kind of put me into a place where I was having to really think about things, then they're more likely to want to come back and also tell other people. I mean, this is one thing that I heard a lot when I was working with a couple of different police forces, particularly when I was working with females in the police. They were saying, you know, the process scared them, essentially, and that they didn't feel like it was enjoyable and that they got the feedback they required. So therefore they kind of avoided it. And a lot of them were getting to a place in their career where they weren't taking the next step for that reason. And one of the first things I said was, you guys need to reassess actually how you go about that. Because it's not about people not wanting to take the next step. It's that bit in the middle. It feels like a barrier at the moment. And we need to make it an enjoyable experience. I mean, nobody's ever going to love an interview, are they?
No, it's a high pressure situation, isn't it?
But if I still think if the right people in front of you, you'll get the best of people. If you really want them to succeed, then, and that doesn't mean always getting the job, it just means succeed in the moment, doesn't it? Then you're gonna put them in a better place by thinking that through. From an assessment centre perspective, we definitely see the benefits of partnerships going through to take, we class it as stakeholder assessments, don't we? So people who go on to take a part of a business or move into kind of a more influential role in an organisation. And I think even more so they're looking at values, aren't they? And they're thinking about how that aligns with, and how we assess. I guess it's probably a good idea to mention how we, you know, when we're assessing what we're looking for and how we kind of score them. So do you want to kind of shine a little bit of light on what we've been doing with the people we've been working with most recently?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, obviously we establish the values of that organisation and what they are looking for in individuals. And then we take that and create a scoring criteria around them. So we look at what we're looking for. So what does that behaviour look like on a good day?
Yeah.
And then what does it not look like?
Yeah.
And then, so it's so easy then to follow from an assessor's point of view. Every time you see that behaviour, you make a mark of it, you make a note of it. And then you transfer the marks that you give them into a scale, and that gives you the score. And it's the same for every single candidate across every single promotion process. So it's just fair across the board.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think in one of our biggest clients that we're working with, it's very consistent there, isn't it? It's part of the lingo. Everyone uses the 5 words, you know. And I think even us as T2, we've kind of been able to step in and see what good looks like and what it doesn't look like by working alongside those guys, because we can understand certain words as external consultants. They've got to help us put it into their language and their understanding. And I think when I think about how we've kind of built that process out, it's been a bit of a learning curve for us. But it's also been what's made that successful is us working with the internal team and us all being aligned on assessment. So to put it into context, we're all assessing as assessors if we're in that role, and we compare at the end, don't we? So if someone is massively different to everyone else, we want to listen to the reasons why, because we might have missed something. There might have been in that group session, we think that person there wasn't showing us collaboration. And all of a sudden this one person in the assessment team goes, well, let me just bring it back to 10 minutes ago when I was watching them do X, Y, Z. This person looked detached, they were struggling, this person leaned right in and what they did was this. And we go, well, that's 3 points straight away, you know. So I think it's good that there's kind of like that mix of magic, I guess, from the internal team understanding what it looks like for them, for us looking from our side as well, and then bringing all that together in some shape or form. And I definitely think we get a rounded approach from that, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
And I guess it then continues when we're going into situations like when we're taking someone through that process on a journey of promotions. You know, for some companies we work with, it starts from the actual development program. Like we get them all the way through from like coming in as a junior manager, take them all the way through training, and as a team at T2 we're kind of scoring them on what we see throughout that program. It then turns into this whole promotion process for them, and we carry that through, so we kind of get to know their values so well over that period of time, and we also see them in their natural kind of ways of working. So it's quite nice for us to be able to be part of that from start to finish. And I think for watching candidates coming into a company from when they don't know anything or too much about it, that's always quite an eye-opening experience about what their perceptions versus reality are. And that's why you've got to get the right people running that environment, isn't it? I guess that's something to land on, actually, because like to make it successful, we've got to make sure that anyone who's assessing and anyone who's involved in that process, this is the fun thing, is that they've got to be unbiased. But they've also got to know what good looks like and what good doesn't look like. They've also got to have a clear understanding about how we treat the people going through the process, what's expected of them, limiting distractions. I'm going to pick that one up because I can remember a session I did a couple of months ago where I was very conscious that because people had done it for a long time, they were almost checking out a little bit in some of the group sessions, and I could see the odd phone come out and things like that, and I was like, right, I'm going to have to pick that up at the end of the session.
Or maybe asking too many questions of the candidates, probing.
That's a good point, actually, because we get so kind of into it that we go, I'm going to go in again. So that's what we're there for, is to go, okay, so just to put context on, you asked 7 questions there as opposed to 4 here, and we got to keep that balance. But you're absolutely right. And I think, God, there's just so many things to think about. But that assessment team, that's the most important thing, isn't it? Because what you want is your best people that are linked with your value system, no matter who that is. And this is the thing, it doesn't have to be the recruiting team all the time, does it? Because quite often it's nice to have a mix of HR, you know, ambassadors, if you like. Some of your kind of leadership team. I guess some of the operators we work with have got people from L&D in there. They've got people from different areas of the business. I know with one company in particular, we actually have other people who are sort of franchisees in that business that get invited in to be like guest interviewers, if you like. And the reason that they're chosen is because of the way that they positively expose the organization and the values that they exude in their behavior. So I think for me, that perfect balance is kind of like thinking about all those things and also having that external perspective, if you can have that. That's an ideal scenario, isn't it? I think the balance of all those things makes sure that everything's covered, the biases are minimized, and we're giving everyone an opportunity to stay in their best self. So I guess for some people, they're probably going to be thinking about, well, it all sounds like really great, but there's probably a few other considerations in the mix there. And there is, because time and investment.
Oh, yeah.
It's, it's huge. I'm not going to say it's astronomical, because if you think about the cost of losing people at the rates that some companies do, it's minimal compared to that. But there has to be a lot of time and effort put into planning and seeing these things through effectively. So you're talking about resources, people, you're talking about I guess developing, administering, all those things, so many different things in the equation. And it does involve, if you're going to get it right, depending on how often you do it, because for some companies, they might go, hey, I'm just going to engage a recruitment day because we are having a big intake before Christmas. I'm just thinking seasonally, if you like. Other companies will go like every 6 to 8 weeks, we want to do so many of these things because we want a constant trickle of people coming through our system. Other people are like, okay, it's very in the now. We've got a shortage here. We need this, So you got to think about what that looks like. But I guess if you have got a rhythm, then sometimes you can mitigate some of those costs by kind of booking things in advance, making sure everyone knows where they are, permanent project plan going on, all the rest of it. If it's a big event, then that takes quite a bit of planning. And I think one of my biggest frustrations is we go into a panic, we book this big fancy hotel and we stick some posters up and we think that's it. And that's not what it's about. It's about all of the preparation, the letters that go out to candidates, the expectations that you set of them before they get there. And of course, even the sifting, even getting, how are you going to do that? Because there's so many different ways. Candidate experience, you've got to be ready to get that right. That's definitely the most important thing. Anything negative can lead to potential problems in the long term. And all those things. Cultural fit. So what we've kind of said here is we've got to look at behavioural competencies, exactly what you said. What does good look like and what does it really not look like? And then it also just means that obviously we can assess different things within that kind of environment. And I guess maybe the last thing there is thinking around the purpose for what you're doing. Because sometimes you've maybe got 3 roles going, got 50 people coming through, and you're thinking, well, we'll bank some of these people for another role. And sometimes that doesn't have the greatest outcome, because people come with a level of expectations. And if they've had a great experience, they're more likely to say, oh, okay, I'll hang on for the next job. But in reality, would it make more sense to have a smaller, tighter group that you've really filtered down, and you think the likelihood of one of these people getting it based on what we need is very, very important to us. And actually what we'll do is give these 5 people really great interview and 1 or 2 are going to be successful, rather than 50 people that all feel they've got a chance. And then actually we've missed some of the golden opportunities there. So I think for us, I've definitely enjoyed kind of getting more into these types of environments for our clients and learning about it. From you're looking at things from a completely different lens to us. So yes, you're looking at it through a T2 lens, but you're looking at it from a side sort of like more psychology-based element. So what sorts of things are you taking into consideration, and do you lean into frameworks and things like that? Is that kind of the kind of way that you look at things?
Well, I think for me, when I'm doing it, I am focusing on being aware of my bias, because as much as we try and reduce it, you can never eliminate it.
True.
It's also being aware that what I may perceive as one behaviour, another person will perceive as another behaviour. So the importance of having those discussions at the end and aligning with other assessors is so important. And then going back to what you said about training those assessors, particularly the internal ones, making sure they're all aligned and they're completely clear on what needs to happen, just makes the process so much more consistent. And then from a psychological perspective, it's it's framing and advising the client on, okay, what are we looking for? Being very, very precise in what we are looking for. Because if you've got too many things that you're looking for, you're here, there and everywhere, things get put in the wrong box and it's just not a reliable process then. So it's just, for me, it's reducing that bias, keeping consistent and making sure everybody is aligned in what is expected of them.
No, and I think I've observed you kind of like walking many of our clients through this, and it really helps them actually think, doesn't it? Because a lot of these things we think, oh, that's second nature. We obviously think that, but it sometimes takes for us to just bring it back to basics, doesn't it? What I love about what we do is that you'll go in and do that consulting element, and then we'll often end up sort of train the trainer in, where we're working with the assessors and saying, look, this is how we need to be observing things. And the big part of that is the debrief at the end.
Yes.
When we're having that discussion around, okay, let's look at this person here. What did we see? And here's the black and white perspective. This is the score. What did we see? And you're able to then guide the questioning around, okay, so tell me why you came to that, conclusion, and base that off this value. What does that mean? And I think from us as the T2 team, I think we're very much aligned with obviously all of our ways of thinking here anyway, but we're also able to jump in with some of the more kind of influential leadership-y type questions and think about even the self-awareness questions as well, and kind of position things slightly differently. So where people might make an assumption about this particular person being quite loud and stepping in a bit, we can reframe that sometimes around what we understand about that human and why they may act that way.
Exactly.
And, then we're then allowing some space for questioning. So I can think about some situations where they've done the assessment centre on day one and then there's the interview on day two. And because we've all come together at the end of the day and weighed everything up, we've then reweighted the questions a little bit to actually allow them the space to go, tell me about yesterday in that particular exercise there. What did you see? And if that person goes, well, I'll be honest with you, I leaned in far too fast. Or I didn't add much value. But the reason I didn't add much value is because I felt it wasn't my expertise. And I actually think in most situations, if there's someone better qualified than you to answer a question, they should answer the question. That's a very different response to, I just didn't add any value to that situation because it wasn't a big deal. So I think it's good to be able to weigh up all the different approaches we take and think about it from that perspective. So I guess for organizations that might be thinking about revisiting their recruitment processes, I'd probably recommend doing a bit of an audit around, when was the last time they changed their ways of doing things? I guess, have they embraced the new methods that are available to them, technology, and even just taken into consideration the message we send out when it comes to interviews? Because I think if you say the word interview to certain generations, it means different things. If you go slightly, older than 40, 50, 60 years old, we're all still thinking shirts and ties. We're thinking we should turn up smart. But the younger generations maybe don't necessarily see it as rigid as that.
No.
But for some organizations, part of their core values is how they actually show up and how they, so even if we're not communicating that in the right way. I was working with an organization a little while ago and they were talking about, we really need to have a word with some of these youngsters because they turn up dressed as all sorts. And, we're talking to them about they're dealing with clients and, they're in their flip-flops and and I'm thinking, could we not have just set that out from the beginning? What was expected? If in your organisation it's important to X, Y, Z, then let's set it out. So I think it's a good place to reset the boundaries.
Yeah. And when you are thinking, if you are thinking about doing an audit on your recruitment processes, it's even worthwhile asking people who have been through the process recently. So those now in a role, because they've been successful, we want your feedback. How did you actually find the process and what can we do to make your experience better?
That's a really good way of looking at it. And I think actually some of the best companies have gone through their process, they've actually followed up.
Yeah.
They have actually, as well as giving feedback, they've actually said, here's the feedback we've got for you, but actually, how did you find it?
Yeah.
So I think that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, a fire and rescue service I've worked with quite regularly. I'm actually working with them next week as well. They have a feedback survey ready and ask all candidates to fill it in.
I love that.
That's really good.
I love that. You shouldn't be scared of it at all. And if people have had a decent experience, regardless of getting the job or not, they're still going to have some stuff that they can tell you that's useful. Definitely. Well, obviously we're here for our clients and people who may need support with this. But even if it's just from the perspective of giving some advice around this, but certainly if people are looking to put things in place to, think about a more joined up approach to their recruitment, promotions, bringing partners into the business, whatever it might look like. We're here for consulting on that. And also we run these centres regularly for many of our big clients and some of our smaller clients actually. And even down to the fact that sometimes, even though there's not a big assessment centre, we can actually be involved in a recruitment process just from being on a panel for a different voice. You can definitely be more involved in terms of looking at their processes and thinking about what seems to be right. So there's lots of opportunity to work with us if you are one of our partners. But if you are a partner thinking of moving towards a shift towards a more assessment centre approach, just remember some of the key things that we covered off there. So think about the specific skills and competencies you want to evaluate and make sure that you define those clear objectives rather than leaving them too wide. And also make sure you're thinking about designing relevant exercises. And also appropriate assessment methods that are going to line up with that.
And align with the job you're recruiting for.
Definitely. So, I mean, there are some things that you can put in place that are generic because it's behavioural based, but there's got to be something in there that allows you to see, what they're capable of.
How are they going to perform in the role?
Second thing was, you and I have covered a bit of this today, invest in training, make sure anybody who's involved in the process are assessors that are trained, they can score effectively, because this will obviously improve the reliability and validity of the assessment process, eliminate bias or minimize bias. And then the third thing is think about how you can prioritize candidate experience, because you need to create a positive and engaging candidate experience so that people can feel comfortable, show up as their best version of themselves, and hopefully still have a great thing to say about you when they leave. And ultimately, if you can get that right, then you're creating raving fans, and it's better than any Glassdoor review, right? People are going to come back. And if you ever do want to laugh, just go on Glassdoor and just look up some of the worst companies that are on there. You can't actually tell when there's just a really disgruntled one person. But I think it's quite consistent. And I guess another way to consider this, some of the best companies, so the people who get, top 100 companies to work, top 10 companies to work, a lot of those people have started to think or have always done something similar to this to make sure that from the very start, people are, given a really great experience. I can think of a couple of companies we work with locally who just nail it. There's not one person we meet in their business that we think, they're a bit beige. They've from start to finish, from recruitment process all the way through, there's just constant engagement, alignment with values and clarity. So if you need any support, you know where we are. We will make sure we pop some details on the bottom of the podcast about where you can find information around assessment centres. But for now, thank you for joining us on the People Performance Podcast. That was very difficult to get out at this time in the afternoon. I will see you again soon. Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you, Tracy.